Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm going to be talking today, you may have seen it, about the bin strike in Tower Hamlets. Well, not so much the bin strike, that's not too interesting. Essentially there's just a dispute between Tower Hamlet workers and the elected officials about pay. That's all it is. Not too much of a story as to why, but it explains why this happened. It's pretty grim. But when I was looking at this earlier today, I completely forgot about an old character years and years ago, nearly 10 years ago now, called, I'll show you him now, called Lutfur Rahman. Let me get a better picture. So he used to be the mayor of Tower Hamlets, and now he is the mayor of Tower Hamlets again. I'll show you this BBC video from years ago, because his story is, to say the least, interesting. He's a corrupt guy, not a good guy. So let me play you this video, and I might pause it every so often and give my thoughts, because it's just interesting that a man like him, who was mayor, you'll see why he wasn't mayor. He got removed, and now he's mayor again. And the fact he is mayor again is pretty grim. These scenes are pretty grim in Tower Hamlets at the moment, but that's not actually what I want to talk about. I want to talk about this man and his background. So just for a bit of context, this article was back in April 2015, and it's titled "Tower Hamlets Election Fraud Mayor Lutfur Rahman Removed from Office." So let's get into this video.
These were the scenes last May when Lutfur Rahman was elected as mayor of Tower Hamlets. After a bitter campaign, he made this plea.
Please give me a chance. Give me any complaint field. That's all I ask. Despite some of the negativities that went on over the last 5-6 weeks, the people of this borough, I said all along, will judge me on my record.
Today, he was judged in court, and his campaign and his tactics have been damned by an election judge. He found Lutfur Rahman guilty of illegal and corrupt practices and has ruled the election must be run again. Mr. Rahman will be banned from office. It was a huge victory for the 4 local residents who'd risked their own money.
Running an election again in Britain, by the way, is not some normal thing. It's really odd. So there must have been huge evidence to show corruption, because it's just not something that is done willy-nilly. It's a big deal. So there must have been a lot of dodgy stuff going on back then.
Case to court.
Well, it's a fantastic victory for democracy, and that was the main objective. It wasn't directed towards Mr. Rahman personally. It was the fact that we knew there was industrial scale fraud going on, and it was a disgrace to British democracy, and we weren't going to have it, and it's beginning to change.
Election Commissioner Richard Morey QC described what he called
an alarming state of affairs in Tower Hamlets, the result of the ruthless ambition of one man, Lutfur Rahman.
He went on.
The real losers are the voters of Tower Hamlets, and in particular the Bangladeshi community.
Mr. Rahman wasn't in...
For those not aware, there's a big Bengali community in Tower Hamlets. Very big. I think it's like over 30% of the borough is Bengali. I'll have to check that afterwards.
Court, but will now have to pay £250,000 in costs. He was found guilty of a number of charges. It was ruled he'd accused his Labour opponent John Biggs of being a racist. His supporters, it was said, had been involved in postal vote fraud, so-called...
Postal vote fraud. Why postal votes are allowed is beyond me. Well, we know why the left want it allowed, because it helps them win, quite frankly. In very simple terms, there's obviously more to it. Left-wing parties there's just so much fraud and corruption with postal voting. Compared to on-day voting, the risk of fraud just goes through the roof. I despise postal voting. Topic for another day.
Ghost voters were involved. There was an allegation of undue spiritual influence, with concerns raised about a letter signed by 101 local imams, and people being told it was their religious duty to vote for Mr. Rahman.
That sort of reminds me from stories I've heard in Ireland with the Catholic priests. The priests telling people who they should and should not vote for, so yeah, which is obviously not acceptable. Like when I go to church now, a priest would never say vote for this party or that party. So the fact that's still happening, this was 2015, is so wrong. It's terrible if that did happen.
And then concerns that grants were handed to Bengali groups so they would vote for him.
This is a triumph for the democracy and for the people who bought this
He's a
petition.
boy,
We have seen the end
Hand
of
it
a
to
man
him.
who is corrupt and immoral and absolutely has damaged the reputation of our great borough.
Mr. Rahman had denied all the charges against him. The judge said his evidence had been evasive and at times untruthful. He said,
He knew he was driving a coach and horses through the law and he didn't care.
and went on,
As well as playing the race card, Mr. Rahman had been determined to play the religious card.
Lutfur Rahman does have
You can believe it as well. As soon as some people have legitimate accusations thrown at them, just do those two cards. Completely lazy. Essentially, it's an admission of guilt to some extent. You have nothing to defend yourself with, so you just use that cheap card. Embarrassing.
his supporters, though, both in the Bengali community and in politics. When the government sent in a team of commissioners to run some of the financial affairs at the council, Ken Livingstone and George Galloway appeared alongside him. Tonight, Mr. Livingstone said he would stand by Mr. Rahman unless he was convicted and charged of a criminal offence. And today, on the court steps, there was talk of a legal challenge.
Today's judgment has come as a shock. The mayor strongly denies any wrongdoing and has full confidence in the justice system. So the result has been surprising, to say the least. We are now seeking further legal advice on the matter. I also want to take this opportunity to reassure the residents of Tower Hamlets the service will continue. They will continue to receive the highest level of service that they have been receiving, and I will now act as a mayor until the election takes place.
The judge said that the Bengali community are the biggest losers in this because of the way Mr. Rahman acted. Do you agree with that?
I made my statement, Carl, and detailed statement will be released shortly.
Today's judgment also raised questions for government, with calls for a change in the law to make it easier for people to challenge local elections if they feel they're corrupt.
Election petitions don't happen very often, but we'll certainly look in terms of how this particular case was brought about, and we'll look in terms of the rules and regulations. But I can't make a commitment to change anything until we've seen this through.
A new election will now be held in Tower Hamlets, likely to be in the first 2 weeks of June. Carl Mercer, BBC London News.
Clearly a very dodgy guy. So he was banned. So they had an election. It was deemed to be corrupt, null and void, because it was a fraudulent election. He wasn't allowed to run again in that election and was banned from public office for a number of years. This guy, as corrupt and dodgy as he is, he's had the last laugh because he formed another party, him and his mates, him and his colleagues, the Aspire Party. And in the May 2022 elections, you can see here Aspire Party takes control of Tower Hamlets. I think they got 24 of the 45 seats, in Tower Hamlets. So this guy, despite all that, despite the fraud, the undue influence of the imams, postal voting allegations, cheap tactics against his opponents, he was gone for a few years. As soon as the residents of Tower Hamlets were able to vote for him again or not, his party's got elected and he's the mayor again, despite all that, which is astonishing. And then this is currently the state in Tower Hamlets. It's pretty disgusting. There's some videos as well. Imagine the stink and the rats and everything else. I thought that was just an interesting story about this guy. I looked up other stuff. He's a really dodgy guy. I won't go into those stories because I don't know the full details, but you can look him up yourself. He's an extremely questionable character, and a bit of a wrong one. But yeah. I hope you found that interesting. I'm really into my current affairs, but I don't remember hearing about this at all. It's just an article last year, no video from what I could see. So I don't know if it was one of those stories the press choose not to cover too much for their own reasons, for their own media bias. Because some stories, even though they might do an article, they sort of get hidden away and not discussed for that long. But yeah, what do you think of this guy? Let me know in the comments. I hope you found that interesting though.